Have you ever been to a wedding so magical it felt like a dream? That was my wedding. The venue was breathtaking. An old garden estate covered in wisteria and fairy lights. I remember standing there in my flowing white gown, excited, happy, my heart full of love and anticipation. My bridesmaids wore lavender dresses that perfectly complemented the sea of purple and white flowers around us. The sun was setting, casting warm, golden light over everything. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes met Mark's. He looked impeccable in his tailored suit, a perfect Prince Charming in every sense. He smiled, and at that moment, the rest of the world ceased to exist. My dad gave me away, and I could see a tear in his eye as he placed my hand in Mark's. The crowd was a blur. All I saw was Mark. I, Mark, take you, Jane, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, he declared, his voice steady. And I, Jane, take you, Mark, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to love and to cherish, forever and always, I responded, my voice tinged with emotion. Just then, I caught sight of Sylvia, Mark's mother, at the corner of my eye. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrow slits. She looked as if she had just swallowed something bitter. I tried to push the thought away. This was my day, our day, and I wasn't going to let anyone ruin it. We exchanged rings, and as Mark leaned in to kiss me, I felt an overwhelming sense of joy. We were announced as husband and wife, and as we walked back down the aisle, I remember feeling invincible, as if nothing could go wrong. Oh, how naive I was! At the reception, Sylvia approached us. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. Mark, you looked so handsome up there. Thank you, Mom. Jane looked beautiful, didn't she? Yes, the dress is lovely. Expensive, I assume? It's perfect, just like this day, I intervened, not wanting to get into a squabble right then. Well, we all have different definitions of perfection, she quipped, her eyes cutting through the sweetness of the moment like a knife through butter. As she walked away to join the other guests, Mark held my hand tighter, as if he knew that the battle lines were already being drawn. Don't worry about her, he whispered. She's old, set in her ways. What's important is that we're together now. I wanted to believe him, to bask in the afterglow of our wedding day, but something told me that Sylvia was a storm cloud on my sunny horizon, and as much as I wanted to ignore it, I knew we'd have to face it sooner or later. And so, the perfect day had an imperfect undertone, a small shadow lurking in the background. But I put it out of my mind. We danced, we celebrated, and for that one night, everything felt absolutely perfect. Looking back, I wish I had paid more attention to that nagging feeling, that whisper in the wind. But love makes you overlook a lot of things, and I was head over heels in love. Mark was my dream come true, and I was ready to live our happily ever after, even if it came with a few clauses and conditions. Little did I know, those conditions would change everything. The first few years after our wedding were nothing short of magical. Mark and I were the epitome of newlywed bliss, even if our apartment was the size of a shoebox. It was our home, filled with mismatched furniture from thrift stores, photos of our adventures, and dreams of a future together. We were both rising stars in our respective fields, Mark in software development and me in marketing. We were happy, genuinely happy. Our nights consisted of homemade dinners, Netflix marathons, and cuddles on the couch. Our weekends were spontaneous road trips, visits to art galleries, or simply lying in bed, wrapped up in each other's arms. I love this, Mark would say on quiet evenings, his arms around me as we watched some rom-com or drama unfold on the screen. Love what? I'd ask, although I knew the answer. Us. This life we're building. It's perfect. And it's just the beginning, I'd smile back, holding him tighter. But it wasn't just us in that life. There was also Sylvia, like a ghost we couldn't exorcise. She would visit often, usually unannounced, her appearance always bringing a wave of tension that clashed with the peaceful aura of our home. Mark would insist it was just how she was, that she meant no harm. "Oh, Jane, you've placed the cups upside down in the cabinet," she would say, insecting our kitchen like she was some sort of general. "In our house, we always keep them right side up. It's just cleaner that way." "Is it? I never thought of it that way," I'd reply, rolling my eyes internally but putting on a polite facade. "And what is this painting?" She'd point to a beautiful landscape that we picked up at an art fair. "It's too abstract. Doesn't really match anything." "We like it," Mark would interject, trying to mediate as always. "Well, character is one way to put it," she'd scoff before moving on to the next subject of her unsolicited criticism. "I told Mark that his mother's visits were getting to me. She just swoops in like a hawk, picking at every little thing," I vented one evening. "She's just old-fashioned, stuck in her ways," he reassured me. So I tried. God knows I tried. I turned the other cheek, bit my tongue, did whatever it took to maintain peace. But deep down, I couldn't shake off the feeling that Sylvia was more than just an annoying mother-in-law. She was a threat to our happiness, a lurking dark cloud ready to pour down on us. And boy, was I right! I found out exactly how much of a threat she was on one fateful Halloween Eve, when masks come off and true faces are revealed. The honeymoon phase was officially over, and reality was about to give us a wake, upcall like no other. It was Halloween Eve, a time for costumes, trick, or treating, and stories of hauntings and ghosts. Our apartment was decorated with pumpkins, fake cobwebs, and creepy knick-knacks. I always loved Halloween. It was a time to let loose and embrace the mysterious and strange. Mark and I had plans for a quiet celebration that year, just the two of us. But as fate would have it, Sylvia decided it was the perfect time for another surprise visit. "Happy Halloween, lovebirds," she announced, barging in with her suitcase as if she owned the place. "Mom, you could have called," Mark sighed, exchanging a concerned glance with me. "And missed the surprise on your faces?" She laughed, but it sounded more like the cackle of a witch from a Halloween story. We forced smiles and welcomed her, even though her presence felt like an omen. Dinner was a stressful affair. It seemed like the tension was an extra, uninvited guest at our table. Sylvia dissected each dish I had made, giving backhanded compliments that were more insults than praises. "The roast is well cooked, although a little too salty for my taste," she critiqued as she chewed. "I was going for a bold flavor," I replied, grinding my teeth in frustration. "And your apartment is so quaint. Don't you want more space? Bigger rooms, perhaps?" she jabbed, looking around disdainfully. "We're saving for a house," Mark chimed in, an edge to his voice. "Isn't that right, Jane?" "Absolutely," I agreed, barely holding back the urge to tell Sylvia that her opinions were neither needed nor appreciated. Somehow, we survived dinner without an all-out war breaking out. But the air was thick with unsaid words, and Sylvia's intrusive energy was suffocating. We called it a night early, each retreating to our rooms as if licking our wounds after a battle. In the dead of the night, I woke up, needing to go to the bathroom. As I passed the hallway, I heard faint noises coming from the room we used as an office, a room that also served as the storage space for our life savings, which amounted to $500,000. All in cash, a physical manifestation of our dreams and plans, neatly stacked in a safe. My heart pounded like a drum as I moved closer to the door. It creaked open, and there she was, Sylvia, her face a mask of concentration as she stuffed bundles of our money into her bag. The audacity of it made me gasp silently. She was stealing from us, from her own son. It was beyond outrageous. It was unforgivable. I considered confronting her right there, But an idea popped into my head, an idea that would reveal her true colors once and for all. I chose to retreat, my mind racing with plans. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, it hit me. The witch in every Halloween story thinks she can get away with her mischief. Sylvia was no different. But unlike those stories, this was real life, and real life doesn't let you get away with evil deeds, especially not when you're messing with someone as determined as me. I waited for the morning sun to shed light on Sylvia's dark deeds. The showdown was about to begin, and I knew exactly how it would play out. It was time for Sylvia's Halloween masquerade to come to an end. The morning sun crept through the curtains, casting its light on a household on the brink of monumental change. Mark and I sat at the breakfast table, sipping coffee in an uncomfortable silence, all too aware of Sylvia's looming presence. My stomach churned as I remembered the previous night's shocking discovery, my nerves a mix of anxiety and righteous indignation. I knew what I had to do. "Mark, we need to talk," I began cautiously, aware that what I was about to say would strain his relationship with his mother to the breaking point. "I saw something last night that you need to know about." "Go on," he said, his face turning serious. "Your mom was in the office last night. She was taking money from our safe," I told him, my voice tinged with disbelief even as I said it. "What? No? There must be some mistake." Mark looked at me incredulously. "Why would she do that?" "I don't know, but we need to confront her," I insisted. "I have an idea. Let's not say we know it was her. We'll tell her we found the safe open and the money missing. Let's see what she says." Mark was hesitant, visibly torn between his loyalty to his mother and his trust in me. Finally, he nodded. "All right, let's do it." Sylvia walked into the room just as we finished our conversation, a fake smile plastered across her face. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Actually, no," I began, my heart pounding. "Mark, would you like to tell your mom what we found this morning?" Mark cleared his throat. "Mom, we found our safe open today, and our money is missing. All $500,000 we were saving for the new house and our future. Do you know anything about it?" Sylvia's eyes widened, her face flushed. "Why are you asking me? I'm your mother, for heaven's sake." "Well, we have to ask, Mom. It's a lot of money, and we're really worried," Mark continued, the tension in the room rising to palpable levels. "Are you implying that I took it? How dare you accuse me?" Sylvia's voice was a mix of feigned shock and outrage. "It must be Jane, if anyone. Maybe she's not as honest as you think." That was the last straw. Mark's face hardened. "Mom, if you didn't take it, then you wouldn't mind if we checked your bag." Sylvia hesitated, her eyes flickering with guilt. "Well, Before she could finish, Mark strode over to her suitcase, unzipped it, and turned it upside down. The bundles of cash spilled out onto the floor, a waterfall of betrayal. "Mom, how could you?" Mark's voice quivered, a mixture of disbelief and hurt. "This isn't what it looks like." "Jane must have planted it," Sylvia stuttered, her voice tinged with desperation. Mark looked at me and then back at his mother, his eyes filling with tears. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mom. I can't believe you do this to us. To me." And just like that, Sylvia's world shattered. Her son, the person she probably thought would forgive her no matter what, had turned his back on her. She gathered her things, still muttering excuses and denials, but her words fell on deaf ears. Mark escorted her to the door and closed it behind her with a finality that signaled the end of their relationship. We stood there in the aftermath of the turmoil, our eyes meeting in a mix of sorrow, relief, and a newfound understanding. Sylvia was gone, physically and metaphorically, from our lives. The dark cloud had lifted, but at a tremendous cost. In that moment, we both realized that we had narrowly escaped what could have been the end of our own relationship, all thanks to the twisted actions of a woman who was supposed to be family. As we picked up the pieces, both literal and metaphorical, I couldn't help but think that sometimes the ghosts and ghouls of Halloween aren't nearly as frightening as the monsters we discover in our own lives. In the days that followed the unmasking of Sylvia's betrayal, Mark and I found ourselves at a crossroads. Despite the vindication that came with exposing her, the emotional toll was undeniable. Mark was deeply conflicted. After all, this was his mother we were talking about, a woman who raised him. For me, it felt like my worst fears about Sylvia had been confirmed, but that offered little comfort. We both knew that we had to confront her one last time to seek some semblance of closure, or at least understanding. A week after Sylvia's disgraceful exit from our lives, we decided it was time. We couldn't continue with this elephant in the room, haunting us like an unexorcised ghost. Mark took out his phone and dialed Sylvia's number. "Mom, we need to talk. Can you meet us at the cafe downtown in an hour?" he said, his voice steadier than I expected. She agreed, her voice lacking its usual sarcastic zest. I guess shame had finally touched her too. We sat at a corner table at the cafe, coffee's gone cold, barely touched. We looked up as Sylvia walked in. She looked older, her face lined with stress, and her eyes devoid of the mischievous sparkle they always had. She sat down across from us, avoiding eye contact. "So, you wanted to talk," she started, her voice weak. "Yes, Mom. You owe us an explanation. Not just for the money you tried to steal, but for all the years you've tried to undermine our relationship." Mark took the lead, his eyes searching for answers in her face. "I don't owe you anything," she retorted, her voice laced with bitterness. "You think you're so perfect with your little life and your little plans. You never needed me." "That's not the point, Sylvia," I chimed in, unable to contain my frustration. "Being family doesn't give you the right to sabotage us. You were about to steal our future." "Your future? What about my future? I'm getting older. Who's going to take care of me?" Her voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability we had never seen before. "So you thought stealing from us was the solution?" Mark questioned, his disbelief evident. "Mom, you forced us to remove you from our lives. Do you understand the consequences of what you've done?" Sylvia looked at us both, her eyes finally meeting ours. "I lost you, didn't I?" she said softly, almost to herself. "Yes, Mom, you did," Mark replied, the finality of his words hanging in the air. "We can't have you in our lives if we can't trust you. You've broken that trust in the worst possible way." Sylvia nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I guess I deserve that," she said, her voice quivering. With that, she stood up and left, her figure receding into the distance until she was nothing more than a speck, disappearing from our lives as decisively as she had invaded them. As we sat there, the weight of the confrontation settling over us, I couldn't help but think about the twisted roads that relationships can take. Sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding under your bed or in the closet. Sometimes, they're sitting across the dinner table, smiling at you through the eyes of a loved one. Weeks turned into months and the seasons changed, but the scar that Sylvia left on our lives remained. Mark and I began house hunting anew. As we toured potential homes, imagining our future, I sensed his hesitation. Finally, one evening, he broke his silence. "Do you ever wonder if we did the right thing, confronting my mom like that?" he asked, his voice tinged with sadness. "I do," I admitted, "but what choice did we have? She betrayed us, Mark. It was a violation we couldn't ignore." "I know," he sighed. "It's just hard, you know. She's my mom, but what she did, the betrayal, I can't get it out of my head." "I understand," I said, reaching out to hold his hand. "It's a deep wound, and it's going to take time to heal for both of us. But at least now, we can move forward without any deceit hanging over us. As we started to settle into a new chapter of our lives, a disturbing update reached us. Sylvia had spiraled out of control, turning to alcohol to numb her sense of loss and guilt. Relatives told us she had lost her job and was burning through her savings, drinking her days away in desolate isolation. It was a jarring revelation, one that triggered conflicting emotions. On one hand, it was a form of poetic justice, the consequences of her actions catching up to her. On the other, it was a tragic fall from grace, the unraveling of a woman who was family,